The call came at 2047 in the morning. I know the exact time because I'd been lying awake anyway, the way I always do when the autumn cold settles into my bones, and the old farmhouse makes sounds I still haven't learned to ignore after 63 years of living in it. My phone lit up the dark ceiling, and I saw my daughter-in-law's name, and something cold that had nothing to do with the weather moved through my chest. She never called this late. She never called at all unless it was a birthday or a holiday, because my son's wife was polite that way. Careful, measured, always making sure she wasn't imposing. So when I saw her name glowing on that screen, I already knew. Mom. Her voice was barely air. I need you. I was already sitting up. Where are you? A pause. Something that might have been crying or might have been the effort of not crying. The parking lot. Riverside Medical. I didn't know who else. Don't move, I said. I'm coming. I didn't change out of my nightgown. I pulled my coat over it, shoved my feet into boots, grabbed my keys from the hook by the door, and drove 40 minutes through roads I know like the lines on my own hands. The whole way, I kept my eyes on the white center line and told myself she was fine. She had called. She could speak. She was fine. She was not fine. I found her sitting on the curb near the emergency entrance, her arms wrapped around herself, a hospital bracelet still on her wrist. My daughter-in-law, who in 8 years of marriage to my son had never once let me see her cry, looked up at me with a face so swollen I almost didn't recognize her. I got down on that cold asphalt beside her, and I held her. And I didn't ask anything, and she fell apart in my arms the way you can only fall apart when someone safe finally arrives. When she could speak, she said it so quietly I had to ask her to repeat it. It was your son's father's family. They did this, his sister and her husband. She pulled back just enough to look at me. They said my blood wasn't good enough, that I was poison in the family, that Marcus would have been better without me. I felt something shift in me. Not break, something older than breaking. Something that had been waiting a long time to finally know what it was looking at. Tell me everything, I said. Her name is Delia, and she is the best thing that ever happened to my son. I want you to understand that before I tell you the rest. Because the rest gets dark, and in the dark it's easy to forget that at the center of all of it was a woman who had done nothing except love my son faithfully and build a life with him and carry his child for 8 months in her body while his father's family sharpened their knives. Marcus met Delia 7 years before any of this. She was a physical therapist, working long hours at a rehabilitation center on the east side of the city. He was recovering from a knee injury he'd gotten coaching youth football, stubborn about his exercises, difficult with the staff, and, by his own admission, embarrassingly rude to her for the first 2 weeks. She worked on his knee every morning with the patience of someone who had been dealing with difficult men her whole life, and somewhere around week 3, he stopped being difficult and started being smitten. He called me the night he first asked her to dinner. He was 41 years old, and he called his mother like a teenager to tell me he had met someone remarkable. I met her at Easter that first year. She brought sweet potato pie and sat at my kitchen table and helped me clean up after dinner without being asked. And we talked for 2 hours about everything and nothing while Marcus fell asleep on the couch watching baseball. She told me about growing up in Georgia, about her grandmother who kept a garden bigger than most people's yards, about wanting to go back to school for her doctorate. I told her about this farm, about my late husband, about the particular loneliness of a house that used to be full of people. By the time we said goodnight, I had already decided this was the one. Marcus's father's family decided differently. Harold, my son's father, had been out of our lives for decades by then. We divorced when Marcus was 4, and it was not a friendly divorce. But Marcus as an adult had chosen to rebuild a relationship with his father, and I had supported that because Marcus was an adult and it was his right. Harold had remarried, had stepchildren, had a whole life I knew nothing about and wanted nothing to do with. Fine. That was all fine. What I did not know was Harold's sister, Constance. Constance was 10 years older than Harold, had never married, and had opinions about everything with the absolute confidence of someone who had never once been wrong in her own mind. When Marcus brought Delia to Harold's house for the first time, Constance was there. I heard about it later, in pieces from Marcus, from Delia, from the silences around what they weren't quite saying. Constance had looked at Delia, at her face, at her hands, at the way she carried herself, and had made a decision, not out loud. Constance was not the kind of person who said the terrible thing directly, not at first. She was the kind of person who let it drip. A comment about different backgrounds, a question about Delia's family that lingered a half-second too long, a way of addressing Marcus that subtly, consistently left Delia out of the circle. Delia told me once that she had tried. For years she had tried. She had brought food, remembered birthdays, written thank-you notes that went unacknowledged. She had smiled through Christmas dinners where Constance spoke around her like she was furniture. She had forgiven again and again because she loved Marcus, and Marcus loved his father, and she did not want to be the person who broke that. She told me she had spent so long trying to keep peace that she had forgotten she was allowed to feel the weight of it. Those words stayed with me. I've thought about them every day since. The pregnancy changed something in Constance. I think, and I've had a long time to think about this, that a child made it real in a way that a marriage hadn't. A marriage was a piece of paper. A child was a continuation. And Constance, who had spent 7 years letting it drip, 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 looked at Delia's growing belly and decided dripping wasn't enough anymore. It started with phone calls. Delia didn't tell me at the time. She didn't want to worry me, didn't want to seem like she was asking me to take sides. She told me later that Constance had called her no fewer than 6 times in the 3rd trimester, always when Marcus was at work, always with that particular sweetness that means the opposite of what it sounds like. "I'm just concerned," Constance would say. "Marcus deserves a certain kind of stability. You understand. The baby deserves to know where she comes from. Both sides. I hope you're not planning to keep her from the family. That would be such a shame." Delia blocked the number. Constance started calling from her nephew's phone. Delia blocked that one too. And then one Thursday evening in October, 7 weeks before the baby was due, Delia drove to the grocery store 4 miles from their house, and she did not come home. Marcus called me at 8 o'clock, trying to keep the panic out of his voice. He had called the store. Her car wasn't there. He had called her phone, straight to voicemail. He had called her one close friend, her coworker, the neighbor she sometimes talked to on the driveway. Nothing. I told him to call the police and then call me back. He called me back 20 minutes later to tell me the police, at that hour with no evidence of foul play, were asking him to wait. I did not wait. I drove to the store myself. I walked the parking lot. I drove the route she would have taken home. And 3 miles from their house, on a road that cuts through a stretch of scrubby woods between subdivisions, I saw her car, pulled half off the shoulder. Hazards not on, just sitting there in the dark, like a sentence that hadn't been finished. I pulled over and got out, and I called her name. Nothing. I called again and walked the length of the car and looked through the windows and saw her purse still on the passenger seat and her phone on the floor, and I felt the cold move through me again. The same cold as that morning in the parking lot, except much worse. I called Marcus. I told him to call the police again and give them this location. And then I stood on the road in the dark and I waited because I did not know what else to do. The police came. They searched the woods. It took them 40 minutes to find her, 50 yards off the road, conscious but barely, lying in the dead leaves with a broken arm and a gash on her forehead and a bruised face that told a story no one should have to tell. She was taken by ambulance. Marcus met us at the hospital. I held my son in a waiting room chair and he shook like a child, and I kept my hand on his back and I did not tell him what I was already thinking. She was stable. The baby was stable. Her arm would need surgery. The head wound needed stitches. She was going to be all right. At 2047 in the morning, while Marcus slept in the chair beside her bed, Delia called me, and she told me what she hadn't been able to say in front of my son. Because she knew, the way women who have spent years protecting the people they love always know, that saying it in front of him might break something she wasn't ready to break. She had been pulled out of her car. Constance's nephew, a man I had never met, a man I didn't even know existed, had been waiting in that parking lot, had followed her out, had come up to her window under the pretense of saying she had a flat tire. And when she got out, he had not been alone. She didn't see the second person clearly, but she heard Constance's voice, not threatening, not yelling, standing back, in the dark, with that same sweet drip that Delia had been flinching from for 7 years. "I tried to tell you," Constance said, "that this family has a certain standard. You made your choice." Delia ran. That was the only reason she was alive. She ran immediately, into the woods, and she was 8 months pregnant and had a broken arm from hitting the ground when they grabbed her. But she ran, and eventually she couldn't hear them behind her anymore, and she lay down in the leaves and she breathed. And she waited, and eventually someone found her. I sat in my car in the hospital parking lot for a long time after she told me. Then I called my brother. My brother Ray is 68 years old and spent 30 years as an investigator for the state attorney's office. He's retired now and grows tomatoes and complains about his knees. But when I called him at 4 in the morning and told him what Delia had told me, I could hear him become, very quietly, the person he used to be at work. "Don't let Marcus do anything," he said. "Don't let anyone call anyone except the police. And when they come, I want to be there. Don't say more than what you have to. Can you do that?" "Yes." "I'm leaving now." What followed was not fast. I want to be honest about that, because stories like to rush to the justice part, and real life does not rush. What followed was weeks of statements and evidence and a process that ground slowly forward while Delia healed and the baby grew and Marcus tried very hard not to become someone he wasn't. But it did move forward. Ray knew the right people, the right language, the right pressure points in the right order. Delia's account was consistent and specific. The nephew, faced with surveillance footage from the grocery store parking lot that placed his car there, footage from a gas station camera a quarter-mile away, and the unraveling of a story that had too many inconsistencies, eventually began to talk. Constance had organized it. She had been specific about what she wanted. She had wanted Delia frightened enough to leave Marcus. She had not, she insisted, intended serious injury. That distinction matters legally in ways I still don't fully understand, and it did not matter to me at all. What mattered to me was the afternoon Ray called and said the arrests had been made. I was in the kitchen when he told me. I was making the same sweet potato pie recipe Delia had brought to my table the first Easter she came because she had taught me her grandmother's version, which was better than mine, and I had been making it that way ever since. I sat down at the table with flour on my hands and I let myself feel, for the first time in weeks, something close to relief. The baby came on a Thursday in November. Early, but not dangerously so. A girl. 7 pounds, 2 ounces. Eyes that immediately looked like she was assessing the situation and finding it tolerable, which told me she was her mother's daughter. They named her June, after Delia's grandmother who had kept that enormous garden in Georgia. I drove to the hospital and I sat in the room with Delia while Marcus stepped out to make calls. And she let me hold the baby, and June looked up at me with those old soul eyes, and Delia said quietly, "I want her to know you. I want her to grow up knowing she comes from you." I understood what she was saying. She was drawing a line, not in anger, but in clarity. This child would know where her people were, and her people were here. She will, I said. I promise she will. Marcus's father called 3 weeks after the arrests. I don't know what he said to Marcus because Marcus handled that himself, as an adult, and told me only that it had been a hard conversation and that he needed some time. I gave him time. Time is one of the few things that cost nothing to give. Harold did not defend what his sister had done. From what I understand, he cut contact with Constance entirely. Whether that was conscience or self-preservation, I honestly can't say. People are complicated, and I have long since stopped expecting them to be simple. What I know is this. I know that Delia spent 8 years trying to make herself acceptable to people who had decided before she walked in the door that she never would be. I know that she absorbed insults wrapped in sweetness and dismissed them because she did not want to make trouble. I know that she lay in those cold woods in the dark, 8 months pregnant with a broken arm, and she breathed and she waited and she survived. I know that the bravest people I have ever met are not the ones who never get knocked down. They are the ones who decide in the dark, on the ground, that they are going to keep breathing. My daughter-in-law is the bravest person I know. And June, my granddaughter, who grabbed my finger the first time I held her and has not fully let go since. June is going to grow up knowing that. She is going to grow up knowing that her mother lay down in the leaves and got back up. She's going to grow up knowing that strength is not the absence of being hurt. It is the decision about what you do after. She's going to grow up knowing her great-great-grandmother kept a garden bigger than most people's yards, and that her grandmother drove 40 minutes in a nightgown in the middle of October because family shows up. That is what we are. That is what we have always been. And no one, not Constance, not her nephew, not any voice in the dark that wants to tell you your blood isn't good enough, gets to take that away. Not from Delia, not from June, not from any of us. I still make the sweet potato pie. I make it every holiday now, and June sits on the counter beside me the way Marcus used to when he was small, watching my hands, asking questions, stealing bites when she thinks I'm out looking. I always let her think I don't see. Some things you hold on to, some things you pass forward, some things you protect so fiercely that eventually the protecting becomes the story your grandchildren tell about you when you're gone. I intend to be that kind of story.